This class is brought to you by the LA Care and Blue Shield Promise Community Resource Centers. The centers are a place to help you be active, healthy, and informed. We hope you enjoy this virtual class.
Hi, my name is Charmaine Vega, also known as Mama Vega. Today's demonstration is on how to make an authentic Italian tomato sauce using canned tomatoes and fresh herbs and spices. We'll be using aromatic Italian herbs that are fresh, and these are the herbs that are generally used in making some type of Italian dish.
Okay, I'll just take one more of this off, because these seeds here, if you leave them on, it makes it go spangly, like it won't bush out. So this is where all the seeds are. The seeds are going to be down in there. So I'm just going to put it down there so it'll grow more seeds. But I need to get some more basil anyway. I need to get the leaves. If you want to cut some more of that, you can. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut some of the leaves. I'm going to try to take the older leaves that's down here and not some of the new growth, because I need it for my pasta sauce. But the same thing with this. See how these blossoms are here? You want to try to take those blossoms off and just throw it back down in there. And this the same thing here. This one you can see it's a nice hardy stalk, but you want to get rid of, I'll cut it here because that's where the blossoms are, and then I'll take these leaves right here from the sage, and then I'll just throw that back in, so that what you can do is have that. I'm going to take the more imperfect leaves, and I'll leave your really good ones, because I can use the imperfect ones. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to just take some of these. This one is nice. It's growing really well.
Okay, you saw a little bit ago where I was at my daughter's garden, and I ended up picking this fresh basil, rosemary, oregano, and sage. She didn't have any fresh thyme, I should say, but I do have some that I can add in with my dried seasonings that I have. So I'm going to use some fresh seasoning, as well as I'm going to use some of the dried seasoning. And here's the dried seasoning that I'm going to use. This is Italian seasoning, which has a lot of the same ingredients that I just showed you that were fresh, but it also has the savory that's been added to it, as well as a couple of other aromatic spices within the blend itself. This is Celtic sea salt, which I like to use, and that's because it has a more pungent flavoring to it, and it doesn't have a lot of sodium, so therefore I can put it in for people who would have diabetes or something like that. And again, any of the things that I'm telling you to add, be careful of what you're eating or adding, just because if you're taking medications or you have any underlying medical conditions, you want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with any medications that you're taking. And then I like to add a little bit of spice to my pasta sauce or anything that I'm making that's a tomato type of thing. And this has chili peppers. This is crushed chili peppers. And because I'm adding heat to my Italian pasta sauce, this is actually called an arrabbiata pasta sauce, because it has a little bit of a kick to it. So it's not just a plain marinara sauce. It won't have any meat to it, but it is considered an arrabbiata pasta sauce because of the heat that's added. The other thing I'm going to add is I'm going to have some fresh cherry tomatoes that I will cut up, and probably in half or in quarters, and that will be added. This is approximately 1 cup. Okay, so now we have 12 ounces of tomato paste, 14 ounces of diced tomatoes. We have 28 ounces of tomato strips and 28 ounces of crushed tomatoes. And next we have 1 cup of a rose blend, or a red blend wine, and that will be added. And then we also just have a glass of wine over here, and your guess is as good as anybody else's. My mother-in-law, who was Italian, always added a little bit of sugar. This is not regular sugar. This is monk sweetener, which is from the monk fruit. And you can get it pretty much anywhere these days. It used to be very difficult to get, but people who are diabetic or something like that, it's one of the sugars that you can eat and it doesn't raise the glycemic index. And so I will be adding this because it takes a little bit of the tartness out, along with the wine that I will be adding. So those are kind of like traditional things that you would normally add to it, which would be the wine. And she always just had a glass of wine just sitting on the side, whether you would drink it or not, which is like the Italian tradition that when you're making Italian food or pasta or anything like that, you have a glass of wine or you serve it to someone. So that's why I have it there. So that's why we always say, you know, you can either have the glass of wine or you can put the wine in your food, because the alcohol actually cooks off as you're cooking the wine. Within the pasta sauce, when you cook it long enough, it cooks off, and then this just helps it take away the little bit of the acidity that the pasta or the tomatoes would cause. So that'll be adding for that purpose. And last but not least, we can't forget our onion and garlic. Which pasta sauce or dish would be, you know, complete without having that? And again, as I mentioned in another video, that when you add onion and garlic, that's more like a prebiotic. That's going to help the probiotic flourish in your stomach, which will help all of the good bacteria grow in your stomach more so that it'll be able to digest your food better. And as you can see, some of these have started to sprout. So if I wanted to, I could plant these in the ground and I would get another entire clove, or rather bulb. These are cloves. And if I wanted to and planted them, I would end up getting another whole bulb that will turn into a clove that I could break apart and be able to use it. So you can see they're all trying to start how to sprout. But I have some others that are sprouting, so I don't need to sprout these. I will end up using those. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use my garlic press, where I would end up putting the garlic down inside on this side right here. I would put it down in here, right in there. I would put it in there and then press it down. When it comes out, it'll come out on this side right here. And then once it is out, I scrape it off, then I push that in, and any debris that's left, it come back through here, and then you can throw it away. You see, I've actually minced and squeezed out the garlic, and so this ends up being about a little bit more than a tablespoon of garlic. And then I ended up getting a larger onion because I want it to be a little bit chunkier, so that's why you see so much onion there. But again, this is going to be your prebiotic that's going to help your body to digest all the food. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to put it in a pan with a little bit of water. Maybe I'll put a little bit of wine in it to start cooking it down so it'll marinate in there, and then I'll end up adding some of the seasonings to it, so the seasonings will actually get incorporated into the onions and the garlic, and this is what helps the flavor be throughout everything. The tomatoes that I showed you before, all the different types of tomatoes, those were actually organic canned tomatoes, so that I can make it taste more fresh. That's why I'm going to add the fresh spices as well as the dried spices, as well as cook it in together in order to make everything come out as though it was 100% fresh made. And I will add fresh tomatoes to it as well. Now what I decided is I am going to add a little bit of the wine in the bottom of this, and then I'm going to the onion and garlic. Okay, now I'm going to turn this on so it can start cooking, and I'm going to, just so it'll start, the seasonings can start, marinating in, I'm going to put a few of the seasonings in here, and I'm going to add the dried seasonings, not the fresh. I'm going to add the dried seasonings in here, and this will all cook down and marinate together. You see how I'm adding this in? I'm just sprinkling it around, and then I'm going to add some of the crushed peppers, because when you do it like this and it marinates in, it helps to pull out the oils that are in the crushed peppers. So I'm adding a little bit of that to it right in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir it up so that we can get some of the wine mixed in. We're going to stir this up like this. And remember, the onions themselves have a little bit of water in them, so I will put a lid on and then I will turn it down. So hopefully I don't have to add any water to it, because we have the wine in the bottom and then we have the onions that have a lot of natural water in them. So if you don't turn it up too high, the water will extract from the onion itself. It'll cook down and then it'll all be marinated, what we call marriage. It will marriage together. And the oils that come out of the spices will go right into the onion, so that the onions will be totally flavored, and so will the garlic. Everything will be completely flavored. So now what I'll do is I will add a lid to that. While the onion and garlic is cooking, what I'm going to now do is I'm going to take the tomatoes and I'm going to cut them in fourths, so that we end up with pieces like this, because these will cook down too, but it'll give us a nice texture in our sauce, so that it's not just a plain sauce, but will feel like it has some texture. And after I cut all of these down, I'm then going to take my Italian seasoning and I'll put the seasoning on it. So while it's sitting, it's going to marinate with that seasoning, so that ultimately it will also, I'm not adding something to the sauce that has not already been seasoned, so it doesn't dilute the flavor, but it enhances the flavor. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of the Italian seasoning to the raw tomatoes. I'm going to add a little bit of the salt to it, and then what we'll do is we'll mix this around. I'm going to mix it around so that now we'll be able to get everything coated on all sides, so that when we add it, it's going to add more flavor rather than taking away any flavor or watering anything down. And I know for some people it may look like this is a lot of seasoning, but when you taste it, it's so good that it really is not a lot, because it actually absorbs into anything that doesn't have any flavor, so it marinates all the way through. And so now I'm going to let this sit, and this will sit. You can just set it on the counter. You don't have to necessarily put it in the refrigerator, because the other tomatoes that I'm going to use, they are already cooked, and so we don't have to worry about those. It's just a matter of waiting for the onions to cook down, and then I will add this to it to cook this down a little bit, and then we'll start putting everything in one big pot, and then we'll let it simmer. Now I've been letting this simmer, and it ended up being that I only used 2 ounces of the wine that I put in here, but you can see that it's making its own juices, just like I said it would. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the tomatoes that we're marinating. We're going to dump that in, and then I'm going to mix that in so that that can cook down a little bit, like this. And you can see how that's looking very seasoned, very excellent. Actually, it's looking really good just with the tomatoes and onion. So we have this, and then I'm going to cover this back up, and then we'll see what happens. Now these tomatoes that were in the can were not seasoned, so what I'm going to do before I add it into the pot with everything else, I'm going to season these. I'm not going to just add it in. I'm going to season these, so while everything else is cooking, it's going to be marinating again. And you see I'm doing it for each one of them. And that's why when I was telling you how much seasoning I had, it looked like it might have been a lot, but you're going to see it's not. And I do this because you want to look and make sure that everything you're adding, it has the right amount of seasoning for what you're adding. You don't just dump all your seasoning in the pot. Otherwise, you'll have some things that wouldn't have gotten enough seasoning, and then it's not going to taste like it's all the way through. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that the seasonings have been incorporated into all 3 of the sauces that we have. Now we're going to go back and we'll see how that looks. See, doesn't that look delicious? Looks really good, and it's all incorporated into, and you can see how it's all in there now. So now I'm going to turn this burner off and get ready to start adding everything together. The first thing I'm going to put in the pot is going to be the onions that we just finished cooking, and that's because it has all the water, and that will go to the bottom of the pot, and we don't have to worry about not having any water in it. I don't have the burner on right now, we just have that. And then the next thing I'm going to add is going to be our crushed tomatoes. So I have that, and I'm adding the crushed tomatoes to it. So we're adding that in. And then I'm going to add the strips of tomato, which is this one. And again, all of these have already been seasoned. So when I'm adding it in, everything's going to be added together. And then I'm going to add the diced tomatoes, which is this one. So we have that. I haven't added the tomato paste yet because I'm going to stir this up first, and then we'll go back and add the tomatoes. So I'll stir this up and make sure it's well blended. So we're going to blend all of this together, and then after it's well blended, then I will add that together. One of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to take our tomato paste and I'm going to put it in a larger measuring cup, is what I'll do. And then I'm going to take the wine, which I only had used 2 ounces before, so I'm going to take the wine and add that to the tomato paste. And then I'm going to mix it together until it's well blended, and then I'll add it in. So I'm going to keep stirring this until it mixes all together. I'm going to show you how that was mixed all together. You see how it's all mixed together now? It's not lumpy or anything. It's completely blended. So now we can take this and add it over to the rest of the stuff that we have. Okay, now you can see I've brought this back to a boil. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the tomato paste that has been blended with the wine. So this is now going to be added together. And I didn't add any more seasoning to this because I have the flavor of the wine that's in it. So that's going to add another layer of flavoring for you. It's also adding antioxidants to it because of the antioxidants that's in the wine. And what you guys didn't see is, although I had that glass of wine sitting there, I reached somewhere and then I ended up knocking the whole glass over, and it spilled all over my kitchen floor, all over the cabinets and everything. So in the interim, what I was doing is I was cleaning up the mess that I had made behind the scenes that nobody saw. And now I'm going to mix this all together, and you'll see that this is a very thick pasta sauce. And if for some reason, when I'm all finished, if you don't want it to be as thick as this is and you want to thin it out, the best thing to do would be able to add like some type of vegetable broth to it. Do not add wine, or because it would be too much wine, because you would already cook the wine down once it's simmered. And don't add water, because water is going to dilute it. But if you add something like a vegetable broth, it's going to enhance the flavor even more, because that's another layer of flavoring that you would be adding to it. So you can see that it's nice and thick now. And what I'm going to do while this is simmering is I'm going to cut up the fresh spices that I had picked over at my daughter's house. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to strip some of these leaves off the branches like this. You just go backwards with it, and that way you don't have the stem, because these stems are kind of thick and hardy. And I'm going to just go backwards, and that way it just strips them right off. It just strips the leaves. They just come right off. And that's what I'm going to do with these. And I'll do probably about that much, maybe one more, just because rosemary is very good for you. Rosemary is good for inflammation and aches and pains and all that kind of thing, and it also helps with digestion. So I'm going to take those, and then I'm going to do that. And then the other thing I'm going to do with it is I'm going to end up taking another bowl, and these, remember, are my vegetable shears. And you take this, and then you just start cutting them so it ends up where they're like little pieces in there. You don't have to chop it so much. You have all these blades that are really good at just chopping it right down. So I'm going to do that, and you can see how that comes out. It comes out nice and fine. And I'll do the same thing with my basil that's here. I'll take that and chop that up just as easily too. That's going to go in there. So I end up just deciding how much of this I want, and then it'll go right in to the sauce, and it'll cook down. And then I'll do the same thing with the other one. So I'll end up with all of my spices and stuff in the dish. And I'm going to show you with the oregano, you do the same thing. You take that and you go backwards too, and that slides right off. And then you can take these and you can use the same shears and you do the same cutting motion, and then that all comes out. In order for you to get the rest of all of these things out of here, because it doesn't really cut your hand or anything, you may have to use a knife or kind of like hit it a little bit in order to get everything out, and you can see most of it is out. And the beauty of using fresh, when you use fresh, you do use a lot more, and that's because it's not dehydrated and concentrated, but what you will have is, to me, a more robust flavor, because the oils that are in it are naturally extracted from the heat. When the heat hits it, it pulls all the oils out, and then it goes into the food. And it has a lot of medicinal purposes too, all of these different herbs that help build your immune system. So this is very good for building your immune system. You can even make a tea to drink out of this if you want to, in order to help your system. Okay, you can see that it's nice and bubbly right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add our fresh herbs to it, and then I will take that and stir it all in. And so now we're ready. And sometimes what I also do is I cook up some spinach or some zucchini and some yellow squash, and some more onions and garlic, and I'll cook that separately, and then I can add this to that until this, and then you have even a more chunkier one where you can do any number of things with it. You can put it on a pasta sauce, or you can make a lasagna with it. You can do a lot of different things. Or you can do manicotti. So there's a lot of things you can do with the sauce itself. And too bad you guys can't taste it, because it tastes really good. This is really, really, really good. Nice and yummy. Remember, there was one other thing that I said my mother-in-law added, and that was a little bit of sugar. But this is not regular sugar. This is monk sugar, so it will not raise the glycemic index, but it's equal, it's equal to sugar in taste. It actually tastes a little bit sweeter, but this will take any tartness away, so that it has that yummy flavor that you really like. So that's the only other thing I didn't add into this. And now I'm just going to let this simmer for about an hour so that it all cooks together, because remember, everything was separate before. So I'll just let this simmer down, and then it'll be ready in about an hour. Our pasta sauce is now finished, and as Mama Vega always says, now chew on this. Thank you so much for joining me. We look forward to seeing you virtually again next week and at one of our resource centers as soon as we can. Until then, stay active, healthy, and informed. I have an important message for you at this point. All information, content, and material of this video is for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. The information contained on this video is compiled from a variety of sources and is not considered complete. Information is subject to change without notice. If you have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately.